Spotlight on Marketing, brought to you by Armstrong Lloyd, headhunters in the B2B marketing space. I'm your host, Karen Lloyd, and today I'm joined by Patrick Pordage, former marketing lead, and Steve Bell, the former chief commercial officer, both from CMR Surgical. Today, we are going to share their journey on how they work together to build one of the most disruptive challenger brands in the surgical robotics industry. And guess what? They had a fractional of the budget of their competitors, but they rewrote the playbook on how the entire industry now markets itself. So if you're a marketer who wants a real life case study of what happens when sales and marketing stop fighting and just work together, have commercial decisions and find obstacles along the way, this is for you. Welcome, guys. First of all, welcome.
Thanks
for coming on the show.
Nice to be here.
And I'm really excited for this because you guys, you hadn't worked together before and you came together and you've had a real journey in that time. And the thing that I think is the most special thing for me, because we had a pre-discussion, is I can genuinely see how fond you both are of each other and how well you work together. And this has also arisen from this journey. So I think it makes this whole thing, even extra special. So you guys, you were a small challenger brand and you were taking on a company that had 100% of the market share. So commercially, what did that mean to you? And, why did sales and marketing need to show up differently?
Well, I'll take that first. I think it's not only they had 100% market share, they were a Goliath. I think that's an important piece of it as well, because you can have 100% market share and be another small company. These were, Intuitive is a Goliath, a fantastic, fabulous company with brilliant product. And I think the first recognition that you have when you're a small company like us is you can't be a mini version of them. I think that's a ridiculous thing to try and be. You'll just be such a pale comparison of what they are. So I think one of the things that we'd understood as a team, and myself and Patrick had really understood, is that we didn't want to be a mini corporate mini-me. We actually wanted to be a challenger brand from the start. And I think that's if you look at the genesis of what we did, it was that recognition of don't want to be one of them, a small version of one of them. We want to be completely different, and we have to be a challenger brand.
Fantastic. And that was quite brave, because it probably was easier to be a mini-me than it is to be a challenger brand, wouldn't you say?
Actually, I wouldn't. I would say the biggest issue in building any brand is trust. And trust is never more important than when you're dealing with a surgical product, because the chief medical officer said to me on my first ever week, if this product doesn't work, I might kill somebody. So you better be sure about what you're doing. And that was a real sanguine lesson that makes you sit up and think. So trust is the critical component in surgical robotic market. I mean, it's important in all markets, but here it was acute. And therefore, you have to start with the question, why would this unheard of small startup company in the Cambridge Fens be credible against I'm not even going to say multi-billion, 100 billion market cap Goliath, as Steve says? Why would you as a surgeon take that risk? So showing up and being the same was just never going to win. You had to be different.
How did you do that? How did you together as sales and marketing become different?
So I think that there was two things which we were completely aligned on, which was if you're looking from the sales side, one of the things that I said is I do not want to come in and do this in the standard way that med device companies were doing it. And I think that was a really important line in the sand for me. If I was told to come in and do the exact same thing that everybody else has done for the last 30 years, I had no interest in doing that. Because I knew it was a hiding to nothing. I knew that we could only fail if we did the same. And I think what was super refreshing for me was that, I saw Patrick's background was not coming from a J&J or a Medtronic. And I think he brought with him a completely different way of looking at marketing. And I was quite excited by that at the time, because I thought, wow, okay, if our leader, who was Martin Frost, would allow us both to do this in a completely different way, in a tangential way from what everyone else was doing, I actually did believe we had a chance. And I think, and I do credit Patrick with this, I think a lot of the marketing you see today, it's very easy to sit there and see the way that products talked about, the way that marketing works, the way that it's very film-like, a lot of the things that happen. I credit that to Patrick and his team, who did a fabulous job of thinking in a different way. It wasn't making the standard product video. It wasn't making the standard claims. It wasn't making the standard reveals. And we can talk more about how we did that, but I credit Patrick with that. And it was liberating for me on the sales side to think, okay, I've got a partner who is going to allow me to be a bit more out there with the sales approach, the commercial approach, that my partner will be aligned with me with that. Because if you had one that was doing it the standard way and one that was kind of being off at 90 degrees to that, I think it would have looked weird. So I think that was a really important thing. I don't know what you think, Patrick.
Yeah, I mean, I think the market was used to one single supplier. And therefore, as always, when you've only ever had one choice, there's a hunger for something different. And so actually, when we came along and said, let's take a different approach to marketing and sales. And let me give you an example here. So in medical sales, more often than not, salespeople are incentivized on what they sell, commission. Steve said, no, let's not do that. Let's incentivize them on how happy our customers are. Because actually a happy customer is the best form of marketing you can ever have. And you needed that, I'm going to call it love, from the early customers in the early days. And it needed to be a symbiotic relationship for us to succeed. And so there was the symbiosis between Steve on the commercial side of it, and even calling it the commercial side of it was different. You know, we weren't in sales. We were doing a commercial program that involved marketing and people talking to customers and finding out what they needed.
So when you made this change, were there already salespeople in play in the business when you did this, or was this just, were you building a new team with the new rules?
So fortunately, we had some salespeople who were kind of peripherally involved with the company, giving some advice in. So there were some people who were there, but it was a pretty clean sheet. I think that was one of the beauties of it. It was about 2017 when we realized we needed to go out and build this commercial engine, and we basically didn't have anything. So we had a clean sheet, and we also had a CEO, Martin Frost, who allowed us to make it how we wanted to do it. He brought us in for our knowledge and our quirkiness and our differentness. And if you know Martin, he quite revels in that. So yeah, we were brought in to do that, and it was a clean sheet. So we didn't have to unwind everything. You still had to unwind some mentalities that were out there, and we can talk a little bit about sort of the way that we hired people as well, because I think that was a key piece of it. But yeah, it was a clean sheet.
Yeah, it would be good to know. I know we've got some exciting bits to talk about in a minute about what you did, but it'd be also nice to know the structure, because, you know, it's easy to now to reflect on something and say, oh, this was easy. It was like great. We all loved each other. You know, it was all, you know, but in reality, that never happens in a company. There's always those situations. So it'd be nice to know that the challenges you had to get up to speed, you know, to get to that point where you could start moving forward and making a difference. So, you know, you both worked for other companies. You'd both had learning curves. How did you get to that point where you could actually start doing something by bringing the people and the team and the infrastructure needed in place?
First of all, I'd say Steve was very kind in how he described me. I was actually very lucky. I didn't come from medical devices, so I didn't know the rules that I was meant to be following. So I gladly shot straight through them. And that was actually helpful. And the reason I raised that is because I think for other marketing people watching this, people in the industry will often sit there and say, oh, well, you don't have industry expertise and therefore you're not a suitable fit as a candidate. I would actually argue, having worked in everything from accountancy, product development, AI, robotics, coming in and asking the dumb laddie questions of why normally has a serious advantage, because it's often finding out what the customer really wants as opposed to what your company believes to be folklore unlocks truths. The second point I'd make is think about some of the difficulties you are given and how can you turn those into advantage. So what Steve said was, well, we took a different approach to filming. We had to, because we couldn't show the world what our robot looked like, because it was such a different form factor back then. We weren't ready to release it so we didn't give the competitor a march. So the challenge was, how do I show a robot without showing it? And so the answer was actually really easy, because you only have to open any of magazine. And when someone like Porsche or some of the top-end car companies launch a new car, ahead of launch, they'll often do a blacked-out picture with a silhouette of maybe the rear of the car or something. So I simply found the photographer who did that stuff, a chap called Richard Seymour, and said, I've got a project called Black Cat at Midnight. Can you come and photograph it? And we did. And that, ironically, one of the other founders, Luke Hares, was just repositioning one of the arms when Richard just took a photograph, flash went off, and we caught Luke with the robot. And about 3 months later, The Economist said, we're doing a double feature on robotics. Do you have anything the world has never seen before? And of course the answer was, well, yeah, we have actually. And so part of it is just taking something that was a disadvantage, being awake to opportunities and hoping that serendipity comes along with you on that journey, and you can make things happen often out of really difficult situations.
What did you do with the photos? You said you couldn't show it and then you had to wait 6 months. So why were you doing the photos and what was happening with those?
The simple reason was I needed to create a website to start gaining interest from around the world. And so by showing the very outline of the robot, it gave me material to create a website with, without actually showing something that some engineer could get a slide rule on and work out exactly what we had created. And because it was, as I say, the Black Cat at Midnight project, you get these outlines of something that just appeared different to anything. You know, industrial robots are often the root cause of surgical robots. So these are big, heavy pieces of kit. And I've seen pictures where a patient was being prepped for surgery with a robot above them, and I had to ask the question to the surgeon, where's the patient? Because I couldn't see them for metal and gown. And we had something very different. So we just wanted to try and create a website that teased people into thinking, oh, maybe there's an alternative. So again, we had this disadvantage in that we had this monolithic environment we were working in with just one supplier. So we had to tease people to think, oh, maybe there's an alternative.
And at this point, were you actually selling anything, or this was, it's coming?
No, it was it's coming.
Yeah. And that was one of the beauties actually for us on the sales side, what we call the commercial side, was we didn't have anything to sell. So we had to sell mystique. And the mystique actually worked for us. And if we'll probably talk a little bit about how we got the first people to see it with what we called the velvet rope. And the mystique was very important, actually, especially in those days. You've got to remember, you look back there to sort of the 2015, 2016 time when there was no real alternative and everyone was hearing lots of things were coming, but no one was revealing. And we were able to use that mystique in a very powerful way within the commercial team, because you could get to people who, for a small company, trying to get to those key opinion leaders or whatever is generally quite difficult. You've not got the brand, you've not got the gravity to bring them in. But believe it or not, mystery does bring a lot of those people in. And I think it was a little bit of luck and genius together and executed in a really good way, which allowed us to punch above our weight, because the mystery, people wanted to know what the heck it was. So, if we could invite people to come and see it before it was put out to the world, that was a huge advantage for us.
So when you were ready to go to market, what did you do?
Commercially or from a marketing perspective?
For both, commercially and the market. So together as a team, right, we're ready now. Like, we've done the prep work, we've got some infrastructure in place. What did you do? How did you go to market? What did you do? And what were the discussions around how you were going to do it?
We had recruited a really top flight PR firm. Martin's brief, my total job description upon being recruited was build me a $1 billion brand in the next 3 years. That was it. So there was freedom, but there was also the resource to make a difference. So we had a top flight PR firm, and a woman called Sarah badgered the BBC and the health correspondent there and said, "Would you like an exclusive?" And after months of negotiation, that paid off. And the launch was to allow the BBC we had mocked up and built our own operating theatre, which is, quite an investment. The BBC came and filmed it, and on the agreed day of launch, I think it went live on the 6 o'clock news, the 10 o'clock news, the front page of the BBC website, BBC World Service, 5 Live, and a couple of other places. So we got to, I can't remember now, but it must have been north of 100 million people literally within a couple of days. And that in itself created a buzz. One of the things that Steve did, and I'll let you talk about the sales, was medical salespeople are often dressed in suits, brown shoes, blue suits, dark ties. You can spot them a mile off. And our commercial folk didn't. They wore blue polo shirts, blue gilets with a CMR logo on them. And the day after the launch on the BBC, I think 3 or 4 of our guys were transiting through an airport somewhere in Europe, I can't remember where, and literally this old couple stopped them and said, "Oh, you're that couple that was on the BBC yesterday. You're the robot people." So it just made a bit of a buzz to start with. And then that was followed up pretty short order afterwards with 2 fantastic sales.
Fantastic. And I mean, it's a good sign because everyone's dream, when you're hiring, if you're ever hiring, which I sometimes am in communications or PR, they always say we want to get into the top 10 news side, and sometimes it's not possible if you're, but obviously you're selling a life-changing, to a human being. If your robot can actually make a difference and someone can save lives, then it's a great story to tell. But even then, the good thing to point out, it wasn't easy for you to. It wasn't just that the BBC said, "Oh, come in." You had to keep banging and banging and banging.
No.
So even when you've got a really good story, there's a lot of noise out there, and you have to work. And you also work with a PR agency who were doing that and didn't try to do that in house. So just interesting signposts for people that do that.
Well, I think this is a dual thing. And I think Steve talking about how we then sold it, which then actually multiplied the effect of the launch is quite key. I think you've got to understand your audience. Now, to me, the surgeon is one of 2 people. They are a very analytical, data-driven beast that wants proof and wants clinical data. And so you had to make sure that was there. But actually, if you stop virtually any surgeon in a hospital and say, "Tell me what's in the pocket of your scrubs," they will pull out an iPhone. So they're also a consumer. And I think one of the misnomers I often see in B2B marketing is that somehow, the 47-112 GZX model is somehow going to be massively appealing. People are consumers. People buy emotionally and they post-rationalize afterwards. And I think that's starting to get acceptance, but I'm still amazed about how often it isn't accepted and we seem to sell on spec sheets as opposed to emotions.
Interesting. Another company we were interviewed, they said that every one of their products was named after a dog, which was nothing to do. It was nothing to do with their product, but it was something people would remember rather than number 275216. Which only the techie people know. And everyone's like, is that the 216 or 217? Is it the Alsatian or is it the Husky? People then can remember. So it's like it's a clever thing. But no, great. So come on, Steve, tell us, how did you get the 2 sales then?
Yeah.
So you've got the PR, but then how do you convert the money?
Okay, so it's going to be a little bit of a complex answer, but you've got the first thing about marketing is you've got to generate the pull. Okay, you can't be kicking against closed doors. The marketing kind of opens the door and gets the people ready for you to go in and do the commercial activity. And I want to say commercial, not sales, because I'm a strong believer that selling is a dead thing. You can't sell anymore. People are beyond being sold to. Instead, and I don't even know if Patrick even knows this, but part of where my thinking came from was that I spent a management exchange between J&J. I was at J&J, Johnson & Johnson, but I spent time at Disney. So I had a chance to go around and go with the management teams behind the scenes in Disney. And the whole thing was about experience. It was really about experience. You can't have a child go to a Disney park and not have the Disney experience. You can't have Mickey Mouse with a pair of Nike trainers on because it's the destruction of the experience. And some of it is the mystery and the magic of what happens at Disney that makes it work so well. It was, and that was a good learning for me. So when we were doing the commercial, I and Patrick as well, we really wanted to have people have an amazing experience. And it was called the Versus Experience. It wasn't called the Versus Sales Demo. We wanted people to come and have an emotional experience. So some of the different things we did is we would have these experiential days when people would come to the office up in Cambridge, and they would come and have an experience. That would be one of the things. But at one of the congresses, which was SRS in the early days, we didn't want people just to have the usual thing of turning up on a booth, sort of kicking the robot around a bit and saying, well, that's not a Da Vinci, and walking off, because that's what we believe would have happened. So instead, what we believed in was creating an experience for them slightly off center. And we created something that I call the velvet rope, which was, it was an invite only, and there was literally 2 doormen and a velvet rope. And we made this kind of, again, it was more of the mystery behind it. And Patrick will probably say in a minute that, you tell someone not to tell anyone, of course they're going to tell people. They can't help it. And the key to it was, though, that there had to be something beyond the rope that was worth getting past the rope. And I think the experience, and I'll talk, let Patrick talk a little bit about the experience of what happened beyond the rope. But my concept was make it like a nightclub, exclusive only to get in, and that's going to be your best marketing ever because people will tell people.
It sounds expensive, but I know it isn't. I'm going to let Patrick pick up the story from here. So what you were given this concept, and now you as a marketeer had to make it happen. And what did you do?
Yeah, it was genius as an idea. So industry pays a fortune to put a trade stand, typically with lots of white plastic, on the trade floor of these conferences, an absolute fortune. And people wander around, and it's a bit like fishing with dynamite. Somebody might swim past, they might not. So instead, we hired, because our budgets, as you rightly said, we couldn't outspend J&J or Medtronic or Intuitive on their marketing budgets. We had a fraction. So we had to find a different way of doing it. Now, jealousy is an evil emotion, but one that you can use in your toolkit. So we hired a large room off the floor, on the first floor, that no one else wanted. So we got it for a song. We created with the events team a journey. So we had little stickers on the floor and stuff and on the walls to hint that you were going the right way. So people were like, oh, what's this Versus experience? So going up this corridor. And then we hand invited the key surgeons that we wanted to experience Versus. Now, at this conference, you might get, say, 1,000 surgeons. We would invite 20, maybe 30. Now, those 20 or 30 would come in, they would be checked in, a bit like, first class lounge at, a major airline, and then introduced to the robot, have it explained to them the whole ethos. And we had built inside this little, the room off center, a whole stage step to create the operating theatre, which of course is the surgeon's home, with all our branding around it. So it looked incredibly professional, but it still cost a small fraction of what it would have cost to have built a trade stand. We made it very clear that this was an exclusive invite only event, and the 20, they're called KOLs or key opinion leaders. So the people who think they're important anyway, came along, saw it, typically fell in love with it. And then, of course, what did they do? They went out into the coffee halls and the lunch halls and stuff, and they told all their mates that they'd just seen this thing, and they were going, well, where is it? Oh, it's hidden. And of course, what that created was this, we called it the brand of desire. That was the sort of motto with which the marketing team ran by, which is how do we create a brand of desire? And we played again on human emotions to make people want to come and see our product, and made it very clear it was exclusive and invite only.
And you'd really feel we're talking about a B2C here, but this is a B2B, sell that you're doing. But it feels like that you've used like tactics that are, in a B2C situation. But from memory, is this the same event where you also use the outdoor space at the event as well? Or is this a separate event?
No, that was a different one, but the principle's the same. So again, the thing that is the same is that because we were industry, event suppliers would typically, whatever question you asked them, say no, because you were sort of slightly scummy, because you were just the money that paid for the medical industry to go round and round. And so being told, no, I couldn't exhibit, and no, I couldn't take an advert out, and no, I couldn't do this, I eventually had a frustration and asked them if I could hire the piece of grass outside the front, to which they looked perplexed. They were Italians, never seen this mad Englishman before. So they said yes. And
it was based in Italy, this event, was it, that you were?
This one was based in Italy, in the very, very beautiful Bologna. The reason I hired the piece of grass was because that morning I had been sitting with a professor of surgery who had explained to me in no uncertain terms that once you put a robot into an operating theatre, they don't move. Because people's concept of a robot was a big, heavy piece of kit, weighing, a ton in weight and massive. And what, of course, CMR had was a radically different form factor. This was almost as small as a human arm in many ways. So we could have done some posters that said, hey, we have a small robot, but, that was a bit dull. So I'm afraid I played on the stereotypical image of what, Italian surgeons might like, which is nice cars. We got one of the events team to drive the robot that was clicked into the back of a very British Mini Cooper convertible around the streets of Cambridge. We filmed that. I can't remember how much it cost, probably only £1,000, maybe £2,000. We created a series of vignettes, short sort of 30-second adverts with some iconic, King's College, Cambridge, some iconic backdrops with the robot shooting past in a Mini. And we geo-targeted every surgeon 2 weeks before the conference with those series of adverts across various platforms. The reason I hired the piece of grass was because we parked the Mini outside the front of the conference hall. And as the surgeons queued up on the first day to come in, they went, oh, I've seen that Mini. And we set up a photo booth. Now, the thing about surgeons is there is sort of formal ways that marketing people can address them, advertising and the like. But the most effective way that surgeons communicate is through WhatsApp, private channels you have no access to whatsoever. So we set up a photo booth. We allowed the surgeons to jump into the Mini and have their photo taken with the robot and the Mini. And then they typically put those photographs on their WhatsApp again to all their friends. And I knew it had worked when about 2 years later, a marketing manager from a different organisation came up and said, are there any jobs going? Love to talk to you about them. And I said, well, what inspired you to want to apply to CMR? And they said, well, you're the guys that did the robot in a mini stunt. And I got properly beaten up by my sales team that day for not doing anything as fun. And I think the word fun isn't used as much as it needs to be in building B2B brands. I mean, Steve and I, great friends. We weren't always. I mean, we would butt heads. We're both quite opinionated. We're not afraid of arguing the toss, but we'd always go and have a beer afterwards, kind of thing. And it was always because we wanted to achieve something magical. And so I think, it's not that we were just very lucky that we had a relationship that was super easy. I think we both made an effort. And I would say to any other marketing person watching this, go and befriend your commercial director, because they will give you amazing market insights that you just may not get any other way. And I think it's that friendship that carried us through quite a lot.
Exactly. And sometimes people do say there's not the right culture in a company because of that. And it makes it hard. And, there are different people and different personalities, and you guys have blended together, and you mature, you've got a nice attitude, you've got that sort of incentive. But ultimately, you had the same common goal, didn't you? You both had the commercial goal. You weren't just doing this for it to be like Disneyland or for it to be, you loved the product, but ultimately, you were all going together in the right direction was commerciality. Would you agree?
I think people might really disagree with me on this one, but I think marketing has one job, and that is to make it easier for sales. Because if not, what are we doing? Why are we doing it? It just becomes an ego fest. But what I wanted was surgeons to actually be ringing Steve up and his colleagues and his team, because it makes the sale that much easier when customers come to you, not the other way around.
Yeah, perfect.
I think to add to that, and it is really about it's about getting pull. It makes life so much easier. But we also, I think the other thing that we had, Patrick, was we had the same common goal. If you look at what Patrick came up with, and his team came up with as the genius tagline, which was transforming surgery for good. I do believe that at CMR, we actually, in the early days especially, it wasn't about how do we go out and make money. It really wasn't about that. It was the entire company, and we had brilliant people in the company. They were mission driven, and I think we had the same mission. I wasn't there. No one was there to make commission, because we didn't make commission, so it wasn't about that. It really was about bringing an alternative to a market that was what we believed was just entrapped by a monopoly at that time, and we believed that we were going to change. We were going to literally change the way that the marketing was done, that the commercial was done, that customers had a choice, that patients had a choice. It was so different. The product itself was very different. And I think that was important, that the enemy, and I don't want to use the word the enemy in that sense, but the enemy was outside, not inside. Whereas in many of the companies, and even today, the enemy is sales. Marketing is the enemy of sales. Sales is the enemy of marketing, and finance are these horrible people. And you've got HR who are just the destructors of everything. And you end up with this internal fighting. Whereas I think what we caught was lightning in a bottle, when everybody was rowing in the same direction for a good long period, where our aligned goals were more important than our individual fiefdoms. And I think that was really important as well.
I can remember the finance director coming up to me and saying, do you think you've put enough in your marketing budget for whatever this thing was? Well, there aren't many people. I mean, so he had the same zeitgeist, the same lightning in the bottle, the same mission that we had. And I totally echo what Steve said. Being mission driven, which I think comes from your management team, and particularly the clarity from the CEO empowers people to do amazing things if that clarity is there.
Exactly. And most people that we would interview would always say, I want to work for a company that has purpose. So in a way, it's kind of easier to incentivize people in that way and have the mission. But also you could have had the structure differently, because you could have had money first. And the fact is, so we circle back to what you said at the beginning, was the fact that you said it was about results, and the customers getting the results is how the person was incentivized, not on just selling. And that was the key factor that sort of looped in with the company culture and everything else. But would you say this is like this, so someone else could replicate what you've done here? So you've done this here, you've got this fantastic mission, but maybe another business doesn't have that same, warm feeling about the mission of what they're doing. How could they take what you've done and translate it?
So I think everybody can have a mission. You've just got to find it, and you've got to articulate it, and you've got to be able to in every layer of the company have people believe it. Because if it's just a slogan on a wall, that's not a mission. That's just a placard. And I think that hiring the right people, having the right people, I'm a firm believer that a couple of bad apples can completely ruin the whole thing. And I think we were very lucky that at the time we did have that. But I think you've got to be bold as a company. And I think you've got to say, are you with us and on the mission? And if you believe something else, then you're not a fit for the company. And it starts at the very top and goes all the way down to everybody, to the person who cleans the floors in the organization. It's got to be throughout, that everyone believes in what you're doing. And it is hard. And I think if you're a new start company, you should get the like-minded people at the beginning and build it that way, and be very clear about that from day one. If you're already an established company, I think there is a point where you need to sit back and reflect and say, what are we doing and why are we still doing this? And have we got the right people with the right mentality to continue doing this? And I think you've got to be bold sometimes. And if you've got the best performing salesperson in the world, but they are toxic within the company, they have to go. If it's not aligned to the mission, it has to go. If they're the ones who are saying, no, I just want commission, and I just want this, and I want to screw the customer, and I don't really care as long as I get my money, and they're selling you lots of stuff, that will be cancerous for your company in the long term. So I think people can do it, but it takes a boldness to do it.
No, I think that's very well said, to be fair. Steve, I don't know if you disagree, Patrick, but...
No, not at all. I think it's spot on, as always.
Yeah.
No, I was just thinking that people often go strapline, and I have seen lots of companies, the same as values. The number of companies I've seen that have the same primary values, and it's because they sound sort of nice. Complete waste of time and effort. The strapline of transforming surgery for good, which was obviously a double play. Sometimes, wasn't it Chanel who said, that to create something beautifully simple is the most difficult thing? I paraphrase badly, but the essence of it, that sentence was beautiful because it was simple and memorable, but it was something that the company believed and could get behind because it came from them in the first place. There were a lot of interviews to start with about, why did you join? Why are you here? What do you think, your job is? To distill that huge amount of information down to that very simple expression took effort, but it sat on the wall behind the chief executive for every company meeting. And it was used in every company meeting almost as a starting point to say, here's Colin from mechanical engineering. Colin, what are you doing to transform surgery? Or, from literally the guy checking the screw torque on a robotic arm, through to sales, to marketing, through to every single department. How can you tie back to this mission? And it could. That was the genius of that strapline.
Well, thank you so much. It has been an absolute honour for me today to hear about the journey, the story of what you've done. It was really phenomenal. I know you're really proud of it, but I can see completely why. And I can see, almost like, I know you're not married, but it's like a marriage together in business, you two. And I can just, you're so in sync with each other. I can just see it. And I think that's probably, you're lucky if you get that once in your life in a career. But, if you can work with somebody like that, I think it's amazing. So thank you.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
Today's conversation, you've discovered that it's not always easy to work together in sales and marketing, but with respect and lack of ego and all working together for a common value, you can get there in a way that works for everybody. So thank you so much. So if you can think of one or two people as listeners today that are going to get value for this, please do feel free to share this with them. It may help them overcome an issue they've got or something they're stuck with. I'm really lucky to be a podcast host and speak to brilliant commercial leaders such as Steve and Patrick. But as a passionate business leader myself, I'm also a headhunter and the managing director of Armstrong Lloyd. We are a sales and marketing search firm. So if you're looking to grow your team and you'd like a conversation about what the current market looks like, please do drop me an email at karen@armstronglloyd.co.uk. Thank you for listening and keep shining that spotlight on marketing.